It's all your fault for having a wedding with a woman like that when I'm around. I didn't like it, so I just ruined it. Then woke up in the hospital I was taken to, hearing my husband and best friend talking. Remember, in the middle of my long-awaited wedding, everything suddenly went black. Because I continued to listen to their conversation, they started discussing something shocking. Sleeping pills. It turned out they were having an affair, and my best friend had added sleeping pills to my meal to sabotage the wedding. Knowing the truth, I decided to take revenge on them in my day's date. My name is Michelle. I'm a stay-at-home mom, living with my husband Tom and our son Michael. I've always had a complex about one thing, is that we never had a wedding. 3 years ago, while I was pregnant with our child, Tom, who I was dating at the time, said, the order is a bit reversed, and proposed to me. Chin's over the moon about both the pregnancy and the proposal. However, my parents were strongly opposed. Then during family gatherings, both families maintained their opposition. Shotskuddy shotgun wedding was out of the question. In response to my parents' disapproval, Tom's parents always seemed apologetic and assured me, no matter what decision you make, we will make sure to take responsibility. Having an abortion wasn't an option for me, so I went against my parents' wishes and married Tom. At that time, we wanted a wedding but decided against it, considering the expenses of childbirth. Now, almost 3 years after our son's birth, we still haven't had a wedding. It always bothered me. Finally, my husband said, let's have a wedding on Christmas. The reason being, I was going to return to work at a hotel next spring, and our son was going to start attending daycare. Knowing we'd be busier then, my husband felt we should have the wedding before that. Of course, I immediately agreed. I was so happy, especially since my husband had been going out more often recently for drinks or other events, and I had started wondering, does he find it boring to be with me, or have I gone from being his lover and wife to just a mom? But it seems those worries were unfounded, as the complex I had felt for so long vanished, and the recent concerns about Tom also seemed resolved. Looking back, I realized I was cloud 9. The day after my husband's suggestion, I began planning the guest list. I have 4 close friends. I've been friends with them since high school, and even through college and starting our careers, we've remained tight-knit. Laura is a hardworking lawyer. Nancy is a working mom of 4-year-old twins. Rachel is currently expecting, and Isabel works at a hotel. Isabel works at the same company as her husband. Though each of us is at a different stage in life, we regularly meet up for meals and trips, always staying in touch. I wanted to hand out wedding invitations to these 4 besties in person, so I decided to organize a lunch gathering. Congratulations on the wedding. That sounds weird, right? Happy wedding, Michelle. Thank you for the invite. Rachel, the pregnant one, exclaimed, thanks. Tom was like, let's have a wedding. I was so happy. But Rachel, make sure you don't overdo it, okay? You have to take care of yourself. I said, only to be interrupted by Nancy, a mother of 2. No worries. I was working full-time when I was in her shoes. A wedding is a piece of cake. I had a tough time even with just 1 kid. Everyone is different, so really, Rachel, don't push yourself. While we were discussing, Laura, the lawyer, playfully pinched my right shoulder. Hey, don't flaunt your happiness like that. It's hard for Isabel and me to join the conversation, right, Isabel? Isabel, looking a bit distracted, responded, huh? Oh yeah, seriously, don't show off. I observed Isabel and felt something was off. She seemed less lively than usual. Isabel was usually the lively one, often considered the cute youngest of our group of 4, so her being unusually silent was definitely off. I wondered if the topics we were discussing were unsettling for Isabel, who was still single, or if they were subjects she would rather we not touch upon. I chose not to delve deeper into it. On the day of my wedding, I was so excited, I felt like I could fly. My husband and son were both dressed in matching tuxedos, and I finally got the chapel wedding I had always dreamed of. But my parents, who had initially opposed the marriage, finally seemed to accept and acknowledge us. They were all smiles at us, the newlyweds. I was worried about Rachel, who was pregnant, and Isabel, who seemed a bit down, but I was overjoyed to have all 4 of my dearest friends present with me. It was a truly happy and wonderful wedding. I planned so many special things for the reception afterwards. I was sure it would be a great time. I had no inkling of anything amiss. For the reception meal, we had prepared a French full course. I had often heard brides say they were too nervous to eat much at their reception, but having been married for 3 years already, I was calm and collected. While enjoying the delicious French cuisine, I was comforted watching my son, seated between my husband and me, happily munching on his kid's meal. My son had been such a good boy, sitting quietly. We had promised him that if he got fussy, we took him to sit with his grandparents. He looked so adorable behaving like that. The reception went on without a hitch. Greetings from my husband's boss and colleagues I had worked closely with. A slideshow our friends had made, showcasing our family's memories. There were tears and laughter. It truly was a great time. We went for a wardrobe change. My son had drawn patterns on our pristine white dress and suit with fabric crayons. All three of us matched. For the candlelight service and photo session, I had always known I wanted to wear this dress. After the candlelight service, I took photos with family, relatives, and friends. Everyone complimented my dress, which made me so happy. I caught a glimpse of my husband chatting with Isabel. They knew each other, so there was nothing unusual about it. You see, around the time my husband and I got legally married, Isabella was struggling with workplace harassment at her former job. So, she consulted my husband, who worked in HR, and he spoke on her behalf to his company, leading Isabel to transfer there. Since then, it seemed that Isabel often sought job advice from my husband. Considering I worked in a hotel, I figured my husband, being in the same workplace, would be better equipped to counsel her. So I too asked him to look out for Isabel. My husband appeared to be genuinely concerned, regularly assisting her since then. So even when I saw Isabel laughing and taking pictures with my husband, I didn't think much of it. Things took a turn right before I was about to read a letter of gratitude to my parents. It happened while I was listening to a guest speech. All of a sudden, my vision blurred, and everything in front of me seemed to shake. Up until that point, I felt perfectly fine, but all at once, my sight got fuzzy and my thoughts became jumbled. I've got to hold it together. Even though that's what I thought, maintaining my seated posture became challenging. I'm going to fall. By the time the thought crossed my mind, I was already on the floor. Michelle, what happened? I could faintly hear the alarmed voices of those around me. Someone shouted, "Call an ambulance," but I wanted to tell them, no, I'm fine. Yet I couldn't muster the strength to speak. My husband cradled me, constantly reassuring, "It's okay, it's going to be all right, Michelle. It's just a sleeping pill, don't you worry. You'll be fine in a jiffy." Sleeping pill? What do you mean by that? I tried to figure it out, but I couldn't, and without understanding what he meant, I lost consciousness. When I came to, I was in a hospital. Beside me, my husband was holding my hand. Once he realized I was awake, he immediately called for the doctor. The doctor's diagnosis for overdose of sleeping pills. "Do you recall taking anything?" the doctor asked. Of course, I had no such recollection. My husband seemed just as clueless, and we both shook our heads. The police wanted to get involved, considering the possibility of foul play. I told the police I had no memory of the event and had never taken sleeping pills. My husband stated, "We have no clue. Many people were around our food, so it's hard to say who might be suspicious. Heck, it might even be one of the hotel staff for all we know." I remembered my husband telling me, "It's just a sleeping pill. You'll be all right," before I blacked out, which made his statement seem odd to me. In the end, with neither of us having any leads, the culprit remained unidentified. The police said they would continue their investigation and left. It was decided that I should stay in the hospital for a couple of days just to be safe, and our son would be looked after by my parents. Our relatives and friends rushed to the hospital for support. Once I was awakened, after the police finished their inquiries, they left. Felt alone in the room. I was in a daze for a while. But after some time feeling thirsty, I decided to grab a drink from the hospital shop. Then, in the hallway on the second floor near the store, I spotted my husband and Isabel together. "What's going on?" I thought as I approached. I couldn't believe my ears when I overheard their conversation. There was no need to go that far. "You're the only one that matters to me." I had a feeling Michelle was getting suspicious lately, so I just put on a show with that wedding. I explained it to you, didn't I? I don't want to be taken for a ride with ridiculous child support. It's just until we don't have to spend on Laura anymore. You know, Isabel, narrowing her eyes at her husband, said in a coquettish voice, "You promised, remember?" Hearing that, even I could tell what kind of relationship my husband and Isabel had. They were having an affair, deceiving me and keeping our marriage intact while continuing their illicit relationship. It was a marriage of convenience, just for the sake of it. Moreover, Isabel, who was involved in the affair, was also present in the hospital. I've been betrayed by my husband and Isabel, the two most important people in my life. After that, tears wouldn't stop flowing. I couldn't bear to watch my husband and Isabel being affectionate anymore. I gave up going to the hospital store, returned to my room, and pulled the sheets over my head. My emotions were all over the place, but strangely, my mind was clear. The more I thought about it, the more unforgivable my husband and Isabel's actions became. I was filled with regret and sadness. The doctor told me to rest, but I couldn't sleep. I cried all night, and as the sun rose, I was determined to get revenge on the two of them. 24 hours ago, the love I thought I had for my husband, whom I believed I loved so much, had vanished. And the friendship I valued so much with Isabel had disappeared without a trace. With that determination, I began plotting my revenge against the two. Aware of this, my husband came to visit me first thing in the morning and tried to strike up various conversations. Honestly, it was nothing but stressful. I'm still feeling a bit out of it, so I'm going to sleep. Saying that, I pulled the covers over and pretended to sleep, all the while lost in thought. I want to take everything away from those two. From my husband, I want to take away her home, his job, and all his money. From Isabel, I want to take away her job, her friends, and my husband. Now, what should I do to achieve that? I couldn't come to a conclusion on my own. However, for now, I needed proof of my husband's and Isabel's affair. I knew that much was necessary. 2 days later, I was discharged from the hospital. Desiring swift revenge on the two of them, the very next day, I headed to a private investigator's office and put together evidence of Tom and Isabel's affair. And to find out if Isabel had been prescribed sleeping pills, I had 2 requests. After that, I contacted Laura, who's a lawyer, even though she was surprised when I told her we needed to talk right after my discharge. Laura made time for me. The meeting place? Laura's law office. Want to go to a cafe or a restaurant? I replied to her kind offer. I'd like to talk somewhere private. So, it was decided to meet at the law firm where Laura worked. In the long run, I had thought of officially hiring her as my attorney, so this might have been for the best. I immediately told Laura everything I had seen that day at the hospital. Laura was visibly shocked, but after some thought, she said, "Come to think of it, Isabel always spoke highly of Tom." Then she added, "If that's the case, we need to gather evidence of their affair. If it's true that Isabel had an affair with Tom, and she's behind the incident, that's despicable. I'd like to think of Isabel as my close friend too, so I really don't want to believe this. However, I'll help you gather all the evidence thoroughly. If we don't find any, we'll pretend this conversation never happened. But if we do, I'll be fully on your side, Michelle." I could understand Laura's disbelief. I'd probably have a hard time believing it if I were in Laura's shoes too. For a while, under Laura's guidance, I tried to gather evidence without letting my husband catch on. However, the results weren't great. His phone was securely locked, and he always had it with him. He also seemed cautious, as the number of times he went out drinking had decreased. The private detective I hired had the same results. There were pictures of him and Isabel eating together, traveling in a car, but none of them provided solid evidence of an affair. The only progress was with the sleeping pills. I found out that Isabel, who had been bullied at work 3 years ago, had been prescribed them by a doctor, and I learned the type of drug she had been given. I didn't know what type of sleeping pill I had been given, so I stored this information as evidence to eventually submit to the police. Then I told Laura about the only evidence I found, which was the medicine. Laura suggested, "What if Michelle pretends to be away from home? Maybe Tom will let his guard down." No way. I laughed, but Laura was serious. "You know, I've handled quite a few divorce cases, and it's surprisingly common for spouses to do things at home when the other is away. I think it's worth giving it a shot." So I decided to give it a try. The timing was mid-February, right around Valentine's Day. I wanted to take our son and visit my parents in Nebraska before I start working in March, I told him. When I said that, Tom responded, "Sounds great. Go ahead," and he was supportive. I told him I'd be gone for a week, leaving on a Thursday and coming back the following Wednesday. In reality, the plan was to stay in Nebraska for a couple of nights, show Tom pictures and video calls of us there to reassure him, and then see if anything happened over the weekend. It was all Laura's idea. She also suggested setting up hidden cameras at 3 points in the house: the entrance, living room, and bedroom. This was also Laura's idea, and the camera was something she borrowed from an acquaintance of hers. He genuinely seemed happy to see us having a good time. Maybe I had misunderstood what happened at the hospital. I couldn't see any evidence of an affair. I checked the surveillance cameras that I had set up. First thing in the morning, Tom had turned off the pet camera we used for our son or covered it with cloth. My husband was clearly acting strange. And then at 7 p.m., it wasn't just my husband who came home from work. He brought Isabel with him. Today is Friday, so it must have been perfect for the two of them to have the next day off. Maybe Isabel will stay over the entire weekend. I quickly contacted Laura. So Isabel is the one he's cheating with, huh? After Laura sounded disappointed, she said, "Come back here tomorrow. We're going to get revenge on those two." She said that to me. All this time, on the surveillance footage, my husband and Isabel were getting all cozy. I stared at the screen, mulling over the revenge plan that Laura and I had devised. The next day, I had to go back home after being called into work. I told my parents and had them look after my son. I was hesitant to tell them the truth, but I knew if I did, my dad would say, "Hold on, I'm coming too." I could already picture him causing a scene, so I held back. Returning to New York, I visited Laura's office. Laura greeted me with a worried look. "Michelle, are you okay?" I replied, I'm fine. Sure, I was shocked for a moment when I saw it yesterday, but I have no love or affection left. I just want to break things off as soon as possible. Besides, knowing I'll have evidence makes me kind of excited." When I responded like that, Laura looked somewhat relieved. Then, the two of us reviewed the surveillance footage to finalize our plans. Once we could confirm that my husband and Isabel had left the house, we would break in. We had already secured some space for Laura and me in the bedroom closet, so we'd hide there. We'd monitor the surveillance footage, wait for my husband and Isabel to come home, and make our move when they showed evidence. During that time, I would snap photos with my smartphone, and Laura would record a video. However, my cautious husband didn't seem to want to leave the house at all. Isabel tried persuading him several times, saying, "Come on, let's go out. Let's have a date." But he declined every time. Still watching with impatience, they finally left in the car to get groceries for dinner. As soon as Laura and I confirmed that, we executed our plan. We quickly went back to the house and successfully hid in the closet. After waiting for about an hour, my husband and Isabel returned holding hands. It seemed like Isabel was going to cook dinner, wearing an apron, but it was evident she had nothing on underneath. Please come underneath. Seeing Isabel like that, my husband, seemingly overwhelmed by passion, pushed her onto the couch and started to make a move. We exchanged glances and nodded, then left the closet and approached the two of them. The first to notice me was my husband, who had been holding Isabel from behind. Our eyes met, and my husband froze for about 5 seconds, then turned pale and immediately let go of Isabel. "Why do you stop?" she said to the two of them. "I knew you two were in that kind of relationship." I wanted proof, but couldn't get any. That's why I made up the story about going back home. "Now we can get a divorce. When did you find out?" my husband asked, his voice trembling. "I overheard you two at the hospital. So I knew you both drugged me." "Wait a minute, that's not true. I didn't drug her. It was Isabel who did it on her own." As expected, my husband spilled the beans about the drug. "Did you get it, Laura?" "Got it perfectly." With that, Laura entered the living room. "Why the heck is Laura here?" The first to react was Isabel. "Michelle hired me. I didn't want to believe that Isabel was cheating and drugging drinks, so I was helping her gather evidence to prove it wrong. But I was shocked to see that was actually true on the video." "What do you mean by request?" Having met Laura a few times and knowing her profession, asked anxiously, "Tom, what you did counts as infidelity. Michelle has the right to divorce you and claim alimony? What of your family?" "Hold on. It's not like that. It was just a fling with Isabel. Please don't get the wrong idea." Laura's words shook him, and the husband quickly denied them. "Wait a minute. A fling? You told me once our kid grows up, you were gonna divorce Michelle, didn't you? Was that a lie?" "Of course it was. Who the hell would choose someone like you over their family?" Isabel was at a loss for words at her husband's harsh statement. Seeing Isabel's reaction, Laura decided to pile on more. "I'm sorry to say this when you're upset, Isabel, but we also got testimony that you drugged Michelle's drink. So what? You can be charged with a crime of injury. The police will be here any minute now." "What?" Laura speechless. She seemed too shocked to say anything. "Wait, stop it. It was just a joke, right? Tom, help me out here." Isabel cried out to her husband for help. To make ignored Isabel's pleas, Laura said to him, "If you knew that Isabel was mixing in sleeping pills, there's a chance you could be considered an accomplice." "Why me? She did that on her own." Afterwards, when the police arrived and were shown the footage we had taken earlier, Both Isabel and her husband were taken to the station for questioning. Additionally, when I mentioned the information I had obtained from a private investigator about her being prescribed sleeping pills, they responded, "We will thoroughly investigate that matter as well." I was told that. After Tom and Isabel were taken away, I booked a hotel room and toasted with Laura. I didn't want to spend another second in that house. And for the final touch at the hotel, I sent videos of the affair and the testimony about the sleeping pills to the company where Tom and Isabel worked. The effect was immediate. A week later, Isabel's husband was questioned at the police station. Fortunately, he wasn't charged, but he did lose his job. After the company saw the two videos and confirmed the facts, several testimonies came forward about the two acting suspiciously at work. As a result, my husband was forced into voluntary retirement. Everything went according to mine and Laura's plan. Just around that time, I began discussions about divorcing my husband. My husband came alone to Laura's office. "Didn't you hire a lawyer?" I asked a friend, but they turned me down because they said the odds were overwhelmingly against me. Then, after taking a deep breath, he began to plead. "I came to ask for Michelle's forgiveness. Please, I'll pay alimony or whatever it takes. Just don't divorce me." Saying this, my husband got on his knees and begged. I was unmoved by his pleas. Why would anyone want to get back with a man who cheated and is now unemployed? At least, I don't. Let's get a divorce. No, I'll never do it again. Please reconsider. And Tom Jr. needs his father, right? I was disgusted that he would bring up our son at this point. We don't need a jobless father who's been unfaithful. Even without you, I'm confident I can raise our child without any hardship. Despite what I said, my husband tried to continue with his excuses and begging. Laura interrupted him. "This isn't going anywhere. Should we bring this to mediation? Tom, you're clearly at a disadvantage. The legal fees will just deplete your savings. The rest as long as we get the divorce. It doesn't matter how. But for you, it'll just be like throwing your money away." Tom held his head in his hands and let out a scream. After pondering for a good 5 minutes, he finally agreed to go through with the divorce. My husband finally said, "Give me some time to think." He said in a strained voice, and then left the office. Seeing his state, Laura and I couldn't contain our laughter and burst out laughing. 2 weeks later, Tom messaged me agreeing to the divorce, and we decided to meet again. The location was once again Laura's office. My husband, who came, looked extremely worn out. It seemed like he had given up this time, as he unemotionally accepted all the terms Laura proposed. In the end, he would pay a compensation of $15,000, monthly child support of $400, and I would also get half of my husband's severance pay. We settled on the agreement with no division of assets for my husband. However, he seemed unable to find a new job and begged, "Can I make the compensation payments in installments?" Without any division of assets, the only money he had was his severance pay. Being jobless, he probably had no choice but to use that for living expenses. And so we got divorced without a hitch. I managed to get the money as planned and rendered my husband jobless. I believe I took everything from my husband: family, job, and money. Next is Isabel. For days after the divorce was finalized, I got a call from Isabel's lawyer asking to settle the matter of the wedding out of court. Just like always, we decided to discuss it at Laura's office. As soon as Isabel entered the office, she pleaded, kneeling down, "Please forgive me. I'll pay any amount of compensation." Recalling my husband groveling in Laura's office, I had to chuckle. Not gonna happen. That's what I replied. Line. Aren't we friends? I'm hurt. The look on Isabel's face made me angry. Who had an affair with a friend's husband and then drugged me. It was you who betrayed me first, wasn't it, Isabel? I don't consider you a friend anymore. That's harsh. The sleeping pills weren't a big deal, and I broke up with Tom, didn't I? Isabel shouted back. So what? I'm still hurt. Besides, if you want Tom, he's all yours. As I said this, Isabel seemed a bit pleased. But just so you know, he's unemployed. He quit his job after the affair with you got out. Now he's jobless and can't even pay me alimony. If you're okay with such a man, go ahead. I guess you're content with my leftovers, I said with a smug face. Suddenly, Isabel shrieked and lunged at me. Quickly, her lawyer stepped in to intervene. That was an attempted injury, right? Laura remarked, causing the lawyer's expression to darken. As for the wedding issue, feel free to sue. But please let this one slide, the lawyer pleaded. Laura asked me, "Michelle, are you okay with this?" When I nodded in agreement, Laura said, "All right, we'll drop the settlement. We'll proceed with suing Isabel." No way. Laura, that's too harsh. I never did anything to you. I'm not your friend. Nancy and Rachel, after hearing about this, were disgusted with you. Don't you think you're out of friends? When Laura said this, Isabel began crying hysterically. That's so unfair. What did I even do? Probably fearing another assault, Isabel was practically dragged out of the office by her lawyer. Laura and I burst into laughter. No matter what you did, it wasn't an affair or an injury case. Well, which one is worse? But with this, I successfully took away Isabel's job, friends, and husband. I felt very satisfied. It's been 6 months since then. In the end, since we didn't settle out of court, Isabel was arrested for causing injury. Isabel's parents apparently heard about the arrest from Laura and her friends, and they came to apologize with compensation. According to her parents, she likely won't get probation because she's been denying and showing a bad attitude. On the other hand, her ex-husband seems to be struggling just to pay the compensation. He apparently hasn't been able to find a full-time job yet and is working a construction-related part-time job during the day. At night, he's juggling a job in the cleaning industry, desperately trying to cover alimony, child support, and his own living expenses. I'd be in a bit of a bind if the money stopped coming in, so I hope he doesn't work himself to the ground. As planned, I returned to my job at the hotel. I've been leaving my son in daycare, so I feel bad he might be lonely, but I make sure to spend all my off days playing with him. With the money I got from my ex-husband, I can easily make a down payment on a condo, so I'm also house hunting. Once things settle down at the hotel, I'm going to pay the down payment and buy it. So my current life, with work and time with my son, is much more fulfilling and fun than when I was a stay-at-home mom living with my ex. Moving forward, I want to cherish this life and hope to someday meet someone great. How could this happen in just 5 days? I screamed as I looked around the living room of my house. I had been admitted to the hospital to give birth, and in the 5 days until my discharge, the living room had become filled with clutter. The room had become filled with the smell of rotting food. Unfinished frozen food was left on the desk, along with remnants of leftovers scattered across the floor. Plastic containers and trays, most likely from ready-made meals, were also present. Flies were buzzing around the room, making it difficult to ignore the mess. My husband, waving his hand irritably at the small insects flying around the light, turned around and frowned upon seeing me covering my nose from the stench. See, it's impossible to live in such a stinky room, isn't it? Hurry up and clean it, he said. I was at a loss for words. Could my husband not see the baby in my arms? My name is Madison, a 28-year-old office worker. I've been working at the company I joined right after graduation, blessed with respectable supervisors and colleagues, and everything's been going well. A few years ago, I married Ethan, who I met at the same company and is 2 years older than me. After we got married, I continued working, and Ethan and I were good colleagues at the company. After work, we were great partners, supporting and encouraging each other through our troubles. When we were about a year into our marriage, I found out I was pregnant. We were delighted since we wanted a child. Our parents and in-laws cried tears of joy when we told them. My in-laws have always been kind to me since Ethan and I started dating. When I first went to their house to greet them before we got married, they welcomed me with open arms. After getting married, since our homes are close, Ethan's mother and I often go out on weekends, and we've built a good relationship. When I told Ethan, "Your parents are truly considerate and wonderful," he nodded and said, "Mom's been an amazing mother who's looked after me." Dad worked from dawn till dusk and wasn't home much, but he always showered us with love and gratitude towards Mom, which made me realize, once again, what a caring couple they are. After we got married, my mother-in-law would often express concern, saying values have changed over the years, and as long as you and Ethan are happy with your lives, that's all that matters. But I worry that you, Madison, will be burdened with all the housework now that you're married and working. I reassured her with a smile, saying, "No need to worry. Ethan and I are splitting the chores well and helping each other out," and she seemed relieved. Actually, Ethan and I began living together after we got married. My mother-in-law knew this and was probably concerned about whether we could live together without any discontent. Of course, there were some worries about getting married without having lived together first, but Ethan was always kind to me during our dating period, never forgetting to be considerate even after many years. My expectations were met as Ethan stuck to the promises we made when we started living together. He never burdened me with all the responsibilities and even expressed his desire to lessen my load. He was a caring husband who, upon learning about my pregnancy, urged me to rely on him more in case something happened to our precious child. Despite his busy schedule, Ethan managed to take care of the household. During the early stages of my pregnancy, I suffered from morning sickness and had to take time off work. I used to blame myself for not being able to balance work and everything else, but seeing Ethan go to work every day made me realize that I couldn't even do simple housework due to my illness. When I apologized to Ethan for not being able to do anything, he reassured me that there was no need to apologize. He had lived alone for a long time, so household chores were no big deal for him. He reminded me that I was doing my best to nurture our baby in my belly and that he couldn't completely understand my hardship, so he wanted to take care of our home. Recently, Ethan has been very studious, buying parenting books and diligently studying every day. Seeing him like this made me appreciate even more that I had married him. My pregnancy went smoothly, and I spent it without any worries until the birth. My parents and in-laws would come by from time to check on us, and thanks to the support of those around us, our baby grew well in my belly. As the due date approached and my belly grew, I took maternity leave and focused on staying healthy and calm. It was tough to go out with my big belly, but I managed to make it to my prenatal checkups while taking care of myself. She helped carry my backpack and other items, and while I felt a bit guilty, I was also very grateful. At first, I felt bad for having her come with me and declined when she offered to accompany me. But she cheerfully said, "Now that my children are grown up, I have quite a bit of free time. Besides, attending your checkups is pretty much all I have to do. I'm certainly concerned about your health, but it also doubles as exercise for me, so it's a win-win situation." So I began to rely on her, and together we headed for the checkup that day. Then, one day, while I was getting my usual checkup at the hospital, I was suddenly struck by a pain in my stomach. The doctor, noticing something was wrong with me, calmly said, while trying to reassure me, "I'll perform an internal examination right away." While I nervously waited for the results, the doctor said, "You're showing signs of labor, so you'll be admitted right away. We'll prepare for the delivery while monitoring you closely. But you're going to meet your baby soon," he told me gently. However, it was all so sudden that I was not mentally prepared. In the midst of this, my mother-in-law held my hand and reassured me, "It's going to be all right. I'll be right here with you, so don't worry." I reminded myself that I had to stay calm for my baby, and gradually I came to accept the situation and prepared myself for the imminent birth. I had calmed down a bit when my mother-in-law said, "I'm going to run home real quick to grab what you need. I'll be right back. I'll also give Ethan a call," and she dashed out of the hospital. A few minutes later, my mother-in-law came back and immediately asked me, "Are you okay? Are you in any pain or discomfort?" "Thank you so much. You've been a great help," I replied as she held my hand and said with a smile, "It's nothing. Just let me do this much. Ethan might be able to get off work early. He could still make it in time for the birth. I've already called your parents just in case." Her words reminded me that I had completely forgotten to inform my parents about the labor pain and my anxiety about giving birth. It's my parents, living in the next town over, which I'll equate to living in the next state over, might not make it before the birth, but they said they would come right away. Soon after, my father-in-law arrived, simply saying, "Oh, it's time," and watched over me from the corridor. Then, a while later, my parents arrived. While enduring the repeated labor pains, I waited for the moment to come. My parents deeply thanked my in-laws, saying, "Thank you so much for everything, from getting things ready for the hospital, stay to being by our daughter's side." And to me, they said, "It'll be over soon. And take some deep breaths. We're all here with you. You'll be okay." My in-laws replied with a smile to my parents, "Oh, no worries at all. We're just glad we made it in time," and the whole family, except for my husband, surrounded me. I was growing more anxious as the intervals between the pains shortened, but having my whole family, there was a great comfort. Several hours later, even though it was late into the night, I gave birth to a healthy baby. While waiting in the lounge near the nurse's station, trying not to disturb the other pregnant women and mothers, my in-laws and parents expressed their joy through silent hugs and high fives. Having finally given birth, I was overwhelmed with relief and moved by the sight of my newborn, though I felt a pang of disappointment that my husband was not by my side. He was supposed to have left work early, and I wondered why he hadn't come, but by the next morning, he still hadn't appeared. My in-laws called my husband numerous times, worrying that something had happened, but they couldn't reach him. Even at 9 a.m., my father-in-law went to our house, but my husband did not answer. Finally, when my mother-in-law contacted my husband's office, they were aware that I had been admitted for childbirth and said my husband had left work earlier than usual. It was supposed to be a day dedicated just to me, so he took the day off, and it seemed like he didn't show up at the office. After that, the whole family was in a frenzy. If I wasn't at home or the office, we thought maybe it was best to go to the police, and it was starting to turn into a big deal. However, just as it was about to be noon, the receptionist informed us that my husband had arrived. Relief was short-lived, and I couldn't help but feel anxious, wondering what on earth had happened. But as I was about to speak to my husband, who had come to the hospital room, I was at a loss for words. "Ah, so it's born," he said. It was all he said at first. His suit was disheveled, and his hair was a mess. As he got closer, I could even smell alcohol on him. I couldn't believe he might have gone drinking at a time like this, and when I looked at him, he showed no interest in our baby, instead staring intently at his smartphone. Trying to remain calm, I asked, "What have you been doing up until now?" And then, still half asleep, responded, "Sorry, I just went for a drink." It was an old friend I haven't seen in a while, and I couldn't say no. I've just been sleeping until now and got here late. He didn't take his eyes off his phone during this time, so my anger finally exploded. It doesn't matter if it's been a while or whatever. Meeting friends for drinks doesn't even compare to your wife giving birth. Why didn't you turn them down? My husband kept interrupting with, and it's just that. Eventually, he stopped talking altogether with a sullen face under the fiery glare of my father-in-law. After a heavy sigh, he left the hospital room without another glance at me or our baby. My father and father-in-law tried to follow him, but they couldn't keep up due to their age, and my husband never showed his face at the hospital during my stay. 5 days after giving birth, with the support of my family, both mother and child were healthy and we were discharged without any issues. As my mother and father, who had come from far away, were leaving, my mother-in-law said to them, "We're looking forward to seeing you again. Please leave your daughter to us." On the day of discharge, she helped me get home with my father-in-law carrying the luggage. That morning, after being discharged, I texted my husband just to say I was going home, and he immediately called back. When I answered, he said, "Hey Madison, I'm glad you're discharged safely. I'm going to pick you up, and we'll head home by car." I hadn't expected a call back from my husband, and secretly hoped he might have reflected a bit. When I told my mother-in-law that my husband had called, she was pleased and said, "That's great news. I'm glad he's coming to pick you up." Husband had called, she laughed and joked, "Well, if Ethan isn't busy, maybe he could come pick us up." I told my husband, "I was planning on having your parents send me, but I appreciate you coming to get me." He said, "Got it. I'll let Mom and Dad head back right now." After informing them that my husband was coming to pick me up, my in-laws seemed relieved and went on their way. I thanked the hospital staff repeatedly and finished the paperwork before getting into my husband's car. He didn't apologize for before, but seemed to be in high spirits as he drove. Soon we were home, and I felt like crying from the pain, even from such a short ride. Thinking about all the mothers in the world enduring this pain and persevering through parenting made me feel a little anxious. With my husband's previous enthusiasm for parenting, I had to psych myself up, believing it'll be all right. I chalked up the troubles during my hospital stay to him being tired, or perhaps getting scolded by his dad more than he expected and sulking about it. I braced myself with the resolve that we would raise our baby together and opened the front door. Instantly, an appalling stench hit my nose. Hesitating to enter because of the unknown smell, my husband seemed unbothered and flung the living room door wide open. Immediately, the rotten odor of garbage overwhelmed me, making me feel nauseous. "Ow, that reeks. Hey, clean this up, will you?" He commanded authoritatively, a satisfied smirk on his face. "I waited the 5 days you were in the hospital, so clean this up now. Can't live in a house that smells like this." Holding our baby, I nearly collapsed on the spot, but managed to restrain myself. "How can you live like this, to let the house get so dirty?" I asked, barely containing my anger, to which he nonchalantly replied, "It just happened with eating and sleeping. Food left out, washing laundry, and trash are left everywhere." The house was in a deplorable state, unrecognizable as our home. Seeing the mess, I couldn't help but blurt out, "Stop joking around. You never showed up at the hospital, and you neglected all the housework. Before the birth, you used to help clean enthusiastically. Why have you suddenly stopped doing anything?" He responded incredulously, "Why should I be scolded? You love working, Madison. You worked hard even after we got married and until you took maternity leave. Housework is a wife's job, isn't it? I thought you'd be happy to have something to do when you got back, so I left it for you. Hurry, clean it up now that you're discharged." He had grown accustomed to the mess, nonchalantly relaxing on the couch in the fly-infested living room. It was impossible to live in such filth, let alone lay a clean towel down. I laid a clean towel down for the baby to sleep on. Attempting to clean while holding the baby was futile, so I yelled at my husband, who was scrolling on his phone. "Do you really think I can clean up in this state? If you're not gonna do it, hold our baby at the entrance." "It's impossible to care for a baby in this mess," I said in frustration. He sighed in exasperation. "Why do I have to take care of it? Housework and parenting are your job. You're supposed to do these things, right?" I continued, "And since when did you start ordering me around so much? This is why women are no good. Still acting like you're pregnant, even though there's no baby inside anymore. You're the worst, trying to make excuses and boss your husband around." I reached my breaking point and exclaimed, "Enough? What's gotten into you? Why are you acting this way?" Tears streamed down my face as I confronted him, but he just groaned and avoided my gaze. Then, as if psyching himself up with a slap to his cheeks, he stood up with determination. "I've been too lenient with my wife, turning her into a useless woman. But not anymore. I've decided to properly educate my wife as a husband should," he declared, his face contorted with effort. "I've done my part. I went to pick you and the baby up from the hospital to ensure I wasn't completely detached from parenting. I've made it clear that housework and parenting are your responsibilities. I'm becoming a responsible husband." I was speechless at his transformation as he announced, "I have plans to go out drinking with a buddy. Make sure the house is clean before I get back. Don't expect any help from me." And with that, he left. All I could do was stand there, unable to process the drastic change from the kind man I once knew. What could possibly have happened to turn the man who was once eager to share household duties and learn to be a good father into this? But in my panicked state, the sight of the garbage-filled room pushed me over the edge, and tears began to fall, landing on my baby's cheeks. The baby, awakened by my crying, began to fuss, and I started crying out loud as well. "Mom, I just don't understand anymore. Help me," I pleaded as I sat in the entranceway and called my mother on my phone. As soon as the connection was made, I cried out, and my mother said, "I'll be right there," while my father drove her to me. She told me to wait outside rather than stay in the dirty house. Sitting on the front porch with my baby, I continued to cry quietly under the bright sunshine. When my parents arrived, my in-laws were with them. Thanks upon seeing me, my mother-in-law immediately began to apologize profusely. My parents intervened to stop her, assuring that it was Ethan who was to blame. But once that was settled, I finally had a moment to ask why my in-laws were there. Because in the first place, my mother-in-law confessed with tears welling up in her eyes. "The truth is, we also doubted Ethan and feared he might be troubling you. So we decided to secretly visit your house. That's when we bumped into your parents, and they kindly gave us a ride here. I'm truly sorry for all the trouble our son has caused." I had to somehow stop the conversation from turning into another round of apologies. My father-in-law, who was so angry he looked like he might start yelling at any moment, didn't utter a single word. But the way his temples throbbed red and twitched told me he was on the verge of an outburst. Neither my mother-in-law nor my father-in-law could get through to Ethan on the phone. "A damn son of mine. Next time I see him, I'm gonna give him a piece of my mind," my father-in-law muttered, then took several deep breaths to calm down. After a while, he seemed more at peace and kindly said to me, "Now you shouldn't be stressing yourself. Please, ride my car? We'll handle the cleaning, just wait for us." With that, he and my mother-in-law took my child and me to the car and then entered the house. My parents followed suit, insisting on helping, and I could hear all four of their screams. No doubt they had opened the door to that bug-infested, foul-smelling living room. I hugged my baby tightly in the car, feeling terrible about the situation. Hours passed as my father-in-law went out to buy insecticide, and bags packed to the brim with trash were taken out to the collection area. Thanks to their efforts, when I entered the house again, there were no bugs. Ventilation had been done, and the smell was much less offensive. It appeared they had cleaned every room, not just the living room. I felt a profound gratitude as my mother and mother-in-law prepared dinner. It had been a long time since I had someone else's home cooking. Having managed my diet strictly during pregnancy, it tasted even more delicious, and I polished it off in no time. The home-cooked meal helped ease my anger towards Ethan for a while. As we were waiting for Ethan's return, someone knocked at the door. Just as I rushed to see, my father-in-law reassured me he'd take it easy and went to answer it. He answered and exclaimed, "Ethan?" I knew from my father-in-law calling my husband's name that Ethan had come home. I wondered why he would knock on the door. While quietly trying not to wake the sleeping child, we all went to see. Aztec Perfornial, to my surprise, a man was dragging Ethan into the house. Ethan's face was red and swollen, and he was sobbing loudly. Upon seeing me, the man introduced himself. "Nice to meet you. I'm Michael, a friend of Ethan's. We went out for drinks, and that's when I heard about you and the baby. I had no idea, and I am terribly sorry for causing such trouble. During this challenging time, I caused a lot of distress. I was surprised when I saw my husband still sobbing, so I asked the man to raise his head. Michael, noticing my gaze, said that the man was boasting about defeating his wife in an argument. I asked for more details, and it turns out that what he did was terrible. Even though I told him to go home, he wouldn't listen and didn't understand what he had done wrong. I ended up hitting him, and I am sorry for that. The mood for drinking was gone, and it seemed like everyone had left, but the man couldn't leave my weeping husband behind and brought him home. As I was apologizing for the inconvenience, my husband suddenly raised his face and started yelling. He accused me of resorting to violence just because I was out-argued. He said that I can't get married because I don't understand that household chores and parenting are a wife's job. It was the worst feeling to be punched out of nowhere by someone who was just an onlooker. I apologized for hitting him, but I couldn't understand why he was suddenly saying things like a deadbeat husband. Michael was clearly baffled as well. I realized that my husband's attitude had changed abruptly. He never used to say such things before he was hospitalized for childbirth, and he used to believe that household chores and parenting were a wife's duty and that the husband should come first. I asked him why he suddenly started thinking differently, and he blurted out that household chores and parenting are a woman's job because that's what everyone says. I realized that I was wrong all along. I asked him who exactly he was talking about, and he replied shortly that it was people on social media. I couldn't believe that he was taking information from the internet at face value. Michael raised an eyebrow in disbelief, and my husband, looking annoyed, thrust his smartphone at him. He showed us a website that belittled housewives and was filled with countless stories, praising the shoving of household and parenting duties onto wives. These opinions, which my husband referred to as everyone's, were posted on an internet forum. To summarize my husband's story, it seems that he came across these sites right before I was hospitalized and began to think that he was just pampering me. My husband, being a useless husband, spent his time alone at home during my hospital stay visiting these sites, convinced that he was wrong. As a result, he died with the belief that household chores and parenting are solely women's responsibilities because women are less capable at work and earn less money. He believed that if women had any complaints, they should just work harder. Unlike me, who was speechless with astonishment, both our parents and in-laws were furious. They couldn't believe what they were hearing. "We didn't raise you to be like this," they said in unison. Michael, who my husband looked to for guidance, said coldly, "I'm disappointed. I can't be friends with someone like this. As of today, I'm cutting ties with you." I joined in, confronting my husband. First off, why should I prioritize the opinions of faceless strangers online over us? Are the people writing more trustworthy to you than we are? That made my husband look at me as if he had an epiphany. To top it off, my mother said sharply with a cold look, "It seems that none of the important people here, your dear Madison, your parents, your friends, share those values. If you still think you're right, then I guess we'll have to leave you, because your thinking is different from Ethan's." My father also spoke up, saying, "As things stand, I can't leave my precious daughter Madison with you any longer. Madison, it's not too late. We're ready to welcome you, and it's okay to rely on us if times get tough." Just then, as if a spell had been lifted, my husband, who had been raging just a moment before, suddenly calmed down. No, but he kept repeating. When he looked up and saw my face clearly, his own turned pale as a ghost. For me, the most important thing is Madison. I wanted to be a good husband for her, so I sought out loads of information, and then with tears in his eyes, he prostrated himself before me with a burst of emotion. "I'm so sorry, Madison. I was wrong." Witnessing his sudden apologies, my father-in-law spoke in a calm voice. "I have a question for you. When you were a kid, did you ever see me tell your mother that housework and parenting were a woman's job or show that attitude? Did I appear that way to you as a father?" he asked with tears in his eyes. My husband replied, "Dad, you are always a wonderful father, fully supporting Mom by her side." Then he continued, "I realized that I was too influenced by what I read online, and I couldn't see what was right in front of me. I'm truly sorry." After some thought, I told my husband, There won't be another chance, and I decided to forgive him this time. Since then, my husband has woken up from the spell of extreme online opinions and is struggling with unfamiliar housework and parenting as he engages with our baby. I wonder how long this will last, but my in-laws and my own parents seem to share my feelings as they continue to train him while he still strives on. He now says with concern, "Kids are adorable, but parenting is more physically demanding than I imagine. I now realize you've been doing all the housework and looking after the child alone while I'm at work. Thanks so much. If you're not feeling well, don't hesitate to rely on me." Looking at the smiling face of my husband holding our child, I think he might truly become a good father. I'm hoping these peaceful days will last forever. Thank you for taking care of the stupid old. My brother-in-law and his wife had promised to move with my mother-in-law, who's dementia. However, they dumped her belongings and swiftly left, forcing us to take care of her. My husband and I were in shock, but my mother-in-law was nodding with a smile. However, today's smile from her wasn't her usual confused one. My mother-in-law waved at their car with a grin. And then she loudly said, "They don't have a home anymore." No more home? What in the world is she talking about? What was this surprising counterattack from my mother-in-law on my brother-in-law and his wife who are looking forward to moving? My name is Christine Parker. I'm 34 and work at a company. My husband David and I share the same hobbies, and we both tragically lost our parents early in life. David lost his father during his college years, while I lost both my parents in a car accident when I was young. We both had longings for a warm family, so we got married pretty quickly. At the time of our wedding, my mother-in-law told me, "From now on, think of me as your real mother. You can always rely on me." It was comforting for someone like me, who had lost her parents at a young age, to hear such words. After our marriage, we frequently visited her. Those were happy days, but I had one concern. It was David's elder brother, Michael. Michael, 2 years older than David, was 36 at the time we got married and was still single, living at home. I had no problem with him living at home, but Michael was the complete opposite of David in terms of personality. While David is reserved and humble, Michael judges people by their appearance and status. If he deems someone beneath him, he's outright rude, a typical jerk. Moreover, Michael looks down on David and me, who work at an average company, and ridicules us every time he sees us. I work in a trading company and can't afford to be so leisurely. Even though we were visiting to see my mother-in-law, Michael would often say such things. I'm really sorry about the rude things Michael says. I know I spoiled him, but lately, he doesn't listen to me at all. My mother-in-law always apologizes in his absence. I know I might be a pain sometimes, but I genuinely enjoy talking to you, Christine. Do you think you'll visit again? She'd said that to me. We didn't want to leave her alone with Michael, and more than anything, I genuinely enjoyed our chats with her. So David and I continued to visit her often. Then, about a year later, we suddenly heard that Michael was getting married. We knew Michael had found a girlfriend and had moved out, but was he getting married? It was quite a surprise for us. But after meeting his bride-to-be, it all made sense. She identifies her occupation as a live streamer. Girls as cute as me will always be in demand, no matter the age, Emily boldly stated upon our first meeting, even though she's turning 35 this year. I'm not one to comment on someone's profession, but I was taken aback that she could confidently refer to herself as a cute girl at 35. While the rest of us were taken aback by Emily's boastful introduction, Michael was sitting next to her, nodding proudly. But my company has a strict no-side job policy. They're so behind the times, aren't they? As we listened with a mix of astonishment, Emily suddenly turned the conversation to me. By the way, Christine, what do you do for work? She asked. I wished she'd just leave me alone. Though I felt that way, I couldn't ignore her, so I briefly introduced myself. But as soon as Emily heard my story, she quickly responded, really? Doesn't that sound kinda bland? Are you actually enjoying your life doing that? Seriously? It's a once-in-a-lifetime chance, Gotta live it up or you're missing out. To top it all off, even Michael joined in with those remarks, just with a concerned look on her face. My mother-in-law said, well, if you two have decided on this, I won't oppose your marriage. Just make sure you don't inconvenience others and work together to live an honest life. After my mother-in-law made her point clear, the two of them left in a hurry. I really wondered if those two would be all right in the future. Wishing them leave, we exchanged worried glances. Michael was a handful on his own. And now there was another problematic person to deal with. We immediately began discussing how we should interact with the two of them moving forward. Despite our concerns, everything was peaceful for about a year. Are you sure you're okay on your own? Ching wanna come live with us. We'd offered my mother-in-law to stay with us. However, she reassured us, I'm fine on my own. Don't worry about me. I've plenty of friends around here. Just focus on living a happy life together. Indeed, my mother-in-law is sociable and has many friends in the neighborhood. But she's already 63 years old. Well, folks in their 60s these days are still quite spry. We can't help but worry about the what-ifs. Then, to our surprise, Michael and Emily had come over. For to trail in the years since they got married, they hadn't visited the house at all. Yet now, they were lounging around as if they owned the place. Oh, David, you guys are here too. What's the occasion? We come over every week. When David said that, Michael gave it a look as if he wanted to say something, but then turned to my mother-in-law and said, all right then, take care. With that, they promptly left. Much, what were they here for? Then David asked my mother-in-law, but she replied, it's nothing really. She didn't seem inclined to talk about it at all. Michael's last words had piqued my curiosity, so I chimed in, you say it's nothing, but there must be a reason. However, the mother-in-law just gave vague answers. Please, if there's anything going on, let us know anytime. In the end, we told her that and headed home for the day. That evening, David received a call from Michael. David, it seems like you guys visit Mom quite often. Could you stop? He blurted out such a thing unexpectedly. When pressed for an explanation, he said, you guys must be busy with work, right? Emily is working from home and will take care of Mom. So just stop coming over. And he abruptly hung up the phone. They've been married for a year, and after not seeing her for so long, this sudden demand seemed suspicious. What on earth is Michael thinking? Driven by our concerns, we visited her the following weekend. And sure enough, Michael and Emily were there too. Just the moment Michael saw us, he looked irritated and said, what do you want? I told you, we're gonna take care of Mom. There's a need for you to come. We tried to defend ourselves, but my mother-in-law's subsequent words left us speechless. David, Christine, thank you for always coming over despite being busy. But as Michael said, from now on he will be visiting, so you two enjoy your weekends. To our shock, my mother-in-law was siding with Michael. Hearing this, a smug-looking Michael said, you heard what Mom said, right? If you get it, then get going. With that said, we were kicked out of the house. We couldn't believe it, but if my mother-in-law says so, there's nothing we can do. Still concerned for her, we started calling her more often. Everything okay? Bridget doing well? It's free time. She'd reply, Michael is visiting, so I'm fine. But how about you two? From having a good time. She seemed more concerned about us than herself. We're having fun, but we'd like to see you from time to time. Can we come over this weekend? I'm sorry, maybe next time. In the end, she'd always decline our visits. Then one day, after days like that, David received another call from Michael. We're going to move, so there's no point in you coming here anymore. David was at a loss for words with the sudden news. Michael was about to hang up the phone. In a panic, I quickly asked, why are you suddenly moving? Michael, with a sharp click of his tongue, replied, you guys haven't been to the house recently, so you probably don't know. Mom's going senile. My mother-in-law is becoming senile. That can't be. But Michael snapped, you only talked to her briefly, right? How could you tell from that? She's got dementia. That's what's going on. And with that, he hung up. We hurriedly called my mother-in-law and asked, are you feeling all right? But she simply replied, I'm fine. And then she hung up. Just what on earth is happening? Naturally, Michael and Emily were there. You're back again. I told you not to come anymore. Michael approached us with a sharp click of his tongue. How can we just sit still after hearing such news? We're worried, I replied, but Michael snapped, shut up. However, my mother-in-law just listened to our argument with a smile and a nod. Having heard that, Michael said, I told you, she doesn't make sense anymore. We can't leave her alone, so we're taking her in. That's our kindness. Do you understand? If that's the case, we can. But before he could finish, Michael interrupted. Both of you work, right? What are you gonna do with this senile old woman during the day? Don't talk about her that way. I blurted out. But in fact, no one is home during the day in our house. I couldn't argue that point and just remained silent. It's frustrating, but maybe we have to do as Michael says for now. Feeling utterly helpless, we said, we'll come visit on our days off. Upon saying that, Emily then replied, if you come over that often, it'll be such a bother for me. I really don't like it. But just with her usual lisping way of speaking, the thought of leaving my mother-in-law with someone like her. I exchanged a worried glance with David, but he just looked down and shook his head. Asked whether my mother-in-law understood or not. She just kept smiling and said, "It's okay." Later, we got the moving schedule from Michael and reluctantly headed home. It was on moving day. When we arrived at the in-laws, we were told that the packing was just finished. Emily remarked, "If you were going to come, you should have come earlier and helped." Bad timing on your part. But when we peeked inside, there were still many items left. "There's still a lot of stuff here," I pointed out, and Michael replied, "We don't want to take this old junk with us. We're going to toss it. A few pieces of clothing are more than enough for an old lady." Both Emily and Michael were saying such things together. "Hey, stop it." When I yelled in frustration, Michael shot back, "Then you guys take care of her," and they both jumped in their car. As they drove off, they threw a bag containing a few of my mother-in-law's clothes out the window, shouting, "Good luck with the old lady." Fine. They left us with those parting words, then coolly drove off to their new place. David and I stood there dumbfounded. Yet my mother-in-law just kept smiling and nodding. But today, my mother-in-law wasn't wearing her usual absent-minded smile. As I looked at her, puzzled, my mother-in-law waved cheerfully at their car. Then she said just one thing: "They don't have a home anymore. Don't know 'em." What on earth is she talking about? Looking at David, I saw he was just as bewildered, staring at my mother-in-law. But ignoring our dumbfounded faces, my mother-in-law briskly picked up her bags and said, "David, Christine, how long are you going to just stand there? Come on, let's go inside. I've had some snacks." "What do you mean?" She just looked back at us with a smile full of glee and beckoned us to the entrance. Once inside, she explained everything to us. What we learned was utterly astonishing. The reason why they recently came to visit her house, and her scheme upon discovering it. Each piece of information was beyond our wildest imaginations. Just a few months back, they suddenly showed up in her place. There was an instance when my mother-in-law stepped out for a bit, and she overheard the two of them having an argument. "Are you sure this is really okay?" "Hun, keep your voice down." Feeling a sense of foreboding, my mother-in-law discreetly listened, and as Michael said, that old hag must have stashed some cash somewhere. If we play our cards right and end up living with her, we can take over her assets. But I really don't want to live with your mom. For the money, we have to bear with it. If only she'd go senile, we could hand her off to David. That would be perfect. We get the cash and let David take care of her. I wonder how we can make her senile. Is there a way to hasten it? It seems that for the first year of their marriage, they had a great time living together in their rented apartment. However, after a year of reckless spending, they blew through their savings, and Michael's salary wasn't enough to support them anymore. Emily claimed to be a live streamer, but she hardly had any fans and was only broadcasting to a handful of viewers out of self-satisfaction. Naturally, that meant no real income was coming in. This was with their day-to-day life becoming more challenging. The two even resorted to borrowing from loan sharks. Desperate, they plotted to get their hands on my mother-in-law's assets. My mother-in-law was widowed young, but as it turns out, my father-in-law had been in real estate. Taking over, my mother-in-law turned out to be quite wealthy from the real estate business. Upon overhearing this conversation, she thought if she passed on the assets as they were, it would ruin the two of them. If they wish for it, then I shall oblige and play the part of the forgetful one. With that thought in her mind, she decided to feign dementia to scare the two of them off. Aware that she was just pretending to have dementia, the couple brazenly started discussing their plans to take over the assets right in front of her. No way Mom's really lost it, huh? Emily, did you do something? Of course not. Maybe my wishes worked. But what are we going to do now? If she's gone senile this early, will we actually get the money? Don't worry. First, we tell her we want to build a house to live together. That way she'll build the house and put it in my name. Then we say we need extra, and get another $100,000. I bet if we play up the dementia angle, David and the others will say we should take care of it. Once we have her blessing, we can pass her off and live it up in our new place. How about that? My plan's bulletproof, right? Yeah, sounds awesome. But do you really think it'll go that smoothly? Don't worry about it. She's out of it, and plus David and the others are so annoyingly righteous. It'll be fine. It's scary to think they were planning all along to dump her on us after securing the new house and the money. But my mother-in-law, even hearing this, didn't panic and continued her preparations calmly, pretending to be confused. We were like, if you had just told us. But she said, I didn't want to involve you guys. Sorry for the worry? My mother-in-law said that laughing. However, hearing this, a question popped up for us. Wait a sec, but what about the house? When David said this, my mother-in-law chuckled, "You'll see soon enough." At that moment, the phone rang. It was Michael. When my mother-in-law answered, he shouted, "What the heck is this?" Michael is yelling, "They're telling me I can't live here because it's a rental contract." That's awful. Perhaps Emily joined in, making a scene. Turns out there was more to my mother-in-law's plan. My mother-in-law had conspired with a realtor, an old friend of her late husband, to prepare the new house they had bought to be rented out instead. And today she was waiting on site for them. Moreover, she had inflated the cost and taken extra money from them to build a large parking lot, leaving them without any money to their name. Just with a smile, she informed them of this. "I'm the owner of this house, aren't I? What gives you the right to do this?" And, that the owner, "I seem to recall paying and putting it in my own name. You were supposed to be senile." "Senile? As you can see, I'm as sharp as ever." "Damn you, old hag. I won't forget this. You'll never be forgiven." Michael was still yelling over the phone even now. But my mother-in-law, unfazed and calm, replied, "Michael, knock it off. You're an adult now, it's time to stand on your own 2 feet. Relying on others and taking them for granted, making a fool of everyone around you. That's no way to go through life." After saying that, she nonchalantly hung up the phone. Additionally, she had already arranged for the movers to deliver the belongings not to the new house, but to a rental storage unit. Her friend was waiting at the storage facility, and she received confirmation that the belongings were delivered. The belongings were safely delivered. I thought Michael's plan was diabolical, but it turned out my mother-in-law was even craftier. After that, Michael and Emily stormed into my mother-in-law's house, still fighting furiously. But since they were making such a scene when they arrived, we ended up calling the cops. And when the police showed up, Michael got violent with them too and got himself arrested for obstructing an officer in the performance of their duties. Emily, who was watching, exclaimed, "I didn't do anything," and then she just took off running. Even though Michael was arrested, he was released soon after since it was his first offense. With nowhere else to go, he was allowed to stay at the company dorm out of the company's goodwill, but the whole mess had become known at work. But if he quits his job, he'll have neither a place to live nor any income. So he's biting the bullet and desperately working. Emily asked for a divorce and went back to her parents' house, but she's been disowned because of the whole ordeal, and I heard she's living and working at a nightclub now. As for me, after all that went down, I got transferred to a department at my company that allows remote work, so now I'm working from home. And so we set up our new home near my mother-in-law's place and smoothly started living together with her. We've become really good friends with the real estate agent who helped us with the move and the neighbors around my mother-in-law's house. And now we even go out together as families. If only we had done this from the start. We chat about this, living peacefully day by day. You've got a spare room, don't you? I'm moving in, so you need to leave. My sister-in-law and mother-in-law, who had suddenly shown up at my brand new house, walked around sizing everything up, not even pausing to pay respects to my mother's memorial plaque before confronting me with this demand. My husband, Jason, acted like he didn't have a care in the world, lounging on the sofa with our cat even as he heard what was happening. I looked up to heavens and thought, this is the end? Filled with a fiery determination for revenge. I calmly said, "All right then, take care," and sold the house I had barely lived in. My name is Madison, and I'm a 30-year-old office worker. Growing up in a single-parent household, I watched my mom struggle financially, so I worked hard to earn scholarships and relieve her burden as much as I could. She also wanted me to go to college, probably because she had a hard time without a degree herself. But to fulfill her wish, I studied relentlessly while others were out having fun and got into a top university straight through. After graduating, I landed a job at a leading corporation. When the job offer came, my mom and I jumped for joy. The day I got my first paycheck, we splurged on sushi in Beverly Hills, but we were both so tense. In the upscale environment, we were both tense and couldn't even taste the food. I was worried about fitting in at a glamorous company since I had always been focused on my studies, but my colleagues were very kind, and I managed to get by. Despite having a good salary, my mom and I couldn't shake our frugal habits. Our only indulgence became going out to enjoy delicious meals occasionally. Thank you. That always made me feel proud and like all my efforts were worthwhile. But 4 years into my career, perhaps due to years of hardship, my mom's health began to decline. What would I do without her? That was all I could think about. That's when I met Jason. He was 2 years younger, a born salesman and an outsourced sales rep with a silver tongue. Embarrassingly, at 27, I'd never had a boyfriend. Between studying and the fear of being judged for my lack of experience at my age, I had always run from any potential relationship. Before I knew it, I was 27. Jason effortlessly became a part of my life. We both didn't have fathers and loved cats. And since neither of us could keep a pet, sharing favorite cat videos and dreaming of having one someday brought us closer. After a while, he suggested we go to a cafe. I agreed, my heart racing, and he texted back that he had wanted to ask sooner but was worried about being turned down. I was over the moon, not realizing at the time that it was probably a line he had used before. But I believed he truly cared for me. And then as our relationship started, something miraculous happened. My mom began to regain her spirits as she saw me dressing up and going out. She would say with a smile, "I'll take care of the house. You go and have a good time," almost as if she were the one going on the date. I had always thought sacrificing my happiness was the way to repay her. But I realized that my happiness made her happy too, just as her happiness was mine. As Jason and I became closer, my mom's health improved and she spent less time bedridden. When I told Jason about a conversation with my mother, he proposed, saying, "Hey, why don't we just get married?" Despite it only being 6 months into our relationship, I was completely smitten with Jason. His sister and mother were hairstylists who ran a salon together, and since they planned to live together in the future, he assured me that it wouldn't be a problem. It was reassuring to hear that living with my mother wouldn't be a problem for Jason. Jason firmly held her hands in return and declared, while looking into my mother's eyes, "I'm honored, ma'am. I may be younger and not very reliable, but I promise to make Madison happy." In that moment, I was overjoyed and almost cried. But looking back now, I realized he was nothing but a terrible jerk. I would later come to understand how little experience I had with the opposite sex, or rather, how little I knew about the world. After his declaration, Jason moved in with us, bringing along a slightly large suitcase. He suggested that it would be best to start living together in the house my mother was accustomed to. We welcomed Jason into our small apartment, and while my mother enthusiastically explained how everything worked, he barely listened and said, "Don't mind me. I doubt I'll be here much." I knew he was often out drinking for work and busy with client golf or surfing on Sundays, so I thought that was what he was referring to. He truly never came home. On the rare occasions he did, he would just take a bath, sleep, and upon waking up, he would ask me, "Hey, can you give me some money for food?" At first, I didn't understand and asked him honestly, "Why don't you just eat here? Besides, what about your share of the living expenses, Jason?" Jason had not been contributing financially to the household, and my mother and I were living just as we had before. He then laughed with a puzzled look on his face and said, "Living expenses? Why should I pay for them when I'm hardly ever here?" I almost agreed with him for a second, but then I shook myself out of it and challenged him. "Wait a minute. We're married, right? That means we're supposed to share our lives together. So you want me to come home every day?" He replied, "No, I get that you're busy and maybe staying at friends' places, but I'd like to get a message from you when that's the case." While we were dating, Jason was very attentive, always letting me know if he was going to be late for a date, and he never broke a promise. But after we got married, he stopped reading my texts, and days would go by without a reply. When I brought this up, Jason suddenly turned ice cold and said, "I didn't think you were the kind of woman to say stuff like that," and turned away. His cold expression was something I had never seen before, and it chilled me to the bone. So I blurted out, "I'm sorry. I didn't mean to be possessive." He instantly softened and said, "I know, but come on, we're married, right? Don't you trust me?" I shook my head vigorously and replied, "No, that's not it. I do trust you," almost in tears. In tears, he looked into my eyes and whispered, "Thank you," fearing he might leave me. I gave in and handed over the money. In hindsight, that was the beginning of a nightmare. To avoid worrying my mother, I couldn't confide in her and explained that Jason was just on a lot of business trips. Was alone with my thoughts, I continued this strange marriage, where I would give money to Jason whenever he occasionally came home. It's strange how humans work. Being given such an option made it impossible for me to leave. Jason had clearly read my mind. My mom noticed something was off with me, but she never tried to address it. That's as half a year passed. For some reason, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law started coming over to our place more often. Even though they supposedly ran a beauty salon, they'd show up on weekdays or weekends without even bringing a small gift, sit in Jason's room while he was out and say, "Don't mind us." Just some tea and snacks will do. They'd stay for hours, sometimes even joining us for lunch or dinner. When I eavesdropped on their conversations, they were mostly bad-mouthing others, creating a really unpleasant atmosphere. One day, loud enough for me to hear, my sister-in-law said, "Wow, I can't believe he married such a plain Jane. Her fashion sense is so drab." They laughed heartily together. They didn't specify who, but I knew they were talking about me. When I was reeling from the shock and covering my ears, I heard the damning words, "Well, she's pretty much a good cash cow, isn't she?" And with only her mom around, said my sister-in-law, "Seems easy enough to get money out of her. Plus, we get to do whatever we want." They cackled again. I wanted to storm out of the room and tell them to leave, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Since that day, I've been feeling really down. Jason, as usual, didn't come home and didn't even read my messages. During this time, I failed to notice my mom's health deteriorating again. Then one day at work, I got a call that my mom had been rushed to the hospital by ambulance. When I got there, I found out she had fallen down the stairs of our apartment complex, severely injuring her back. The doctor said that, given her age, she'd likely have to use a wheelchair from now on. From what I was told, Mom had been feeling under the weather for quite some time, experiencing frequent bouts of dizziness. It seems that dizziness was the culprit behind her fall down the stairs. My mom kept apologizing. "I'm so sorry, Madison. I'm really sorry." Over and over, and I just shook my head, crying. I was determined to break through this tough situation. Given that my mom's hospital stay would be quite long, including rehabilitation, I decided to look for a wheelchair-accessible home. Fortunately, we had lived frugally, so there was a decent amount of savings. My mom always loved looking at home ads in the newspapers, often saying how much she'd like to live in such houses. I held on to the hope that buying the home she dreamt of might bring her spirit back. When I asked Jason for his opinion, he casually said, "Why not? I'd like my own room. Oh yeah, let's get a cat too." Seeing Jason's happy face for the first time in a long while made me foolishly happy, so I enthusiastically started house hunting. Luckily, I found the perfect spec house right in our neighborhood. It was completely wheelchair accessible. I felt it was destiny and made an immediate purchase. I could afford a down payment of around $360,000, and thanks to being employed by a top-notch company, the mortgage was easily approved. Of course, Jason didn't contribute a dime, but that had become the norm. He only visited my mom once at the hospital. By the way, my mother-in-law and sister-in-law, despite their frequent visits to our house, never came to see her. I hurried to finalize the house deal before my mom was discharged and managed to move us in perfectly. It was honestly exhausting to balance work and moving, but thinking of my mom and Jason's happy faces, I pushed through. When my mom came to the new house in her wheelchair, her eyes sparkled as she looked around our model home-like place and exclaimed like a child, "I can't believe I get to live in a house like this. It feels like a dream." Jason too seemed to like his new room, as he started coming home more often. Then we went to the pet store together and brought home 2 adorable cats. Both Jason and my mom doted on the cats, and our home was filled with lively energy. Just as I was starting to think everything might turn out okay, tragedy struck again. 2 months after moving in, one morning, my mom didn't wake up. I found it strange and went to check on her, only to discover she had passed away. I called an ambulance, but it was too late. She had suffered a heart attack. With the new house and everything else seeming so pointless now, I was overwhelmed by despair and hardly remember the funeral proceedings. Jason acted the part of the dutiful, gentle husband at the funeral, but as soon as we got home, he did nothing but flop on the couch and say, "Man, I'm beat," tossing the urn carelessly on a shelf. He then asked me, "When's dinner?" as I sat holding my mother's memorial plaque and just played with the cat. Seeing this, I finally snapped back to reality. I had realized a long time ago that my marriage was a mistake, but I had been pretending everything was fine so as not to worry my mother. I also didn't want to admit my failure to myself. But can I really call him my husband if he doesn't even comfort me as I mourn my beloved mother? As I was staring at my so-called husband, dumbfounded, the doorbell rang. When I went to answer it, my sister-in-law and mother-in-law, still dressed in their morning clothes, barged in, saying, "Why, this place is huge. So why didn't you tell us about it?" You see, neither my mother nor had given my mother-in-law our new address. I assumed Jason would tell them, but it seemed he hadn't bothered, perhaps out of disinterest. As they walked around the house, eyeing everything greedily, they smirked at each other and said, "You've got spare rooms, right? We'll live here. You can leave." It seemed they were under the impression that Jason had bought the house. Jason, meanwhile, continued to relax on the couch with the cat, seemingly oblivious to everything. Things looking up to the heavens, I thought it was all over, and then my mother-in-law, still hyped up, said the apartment we're living in now is so noisy. The landlord comes every day just because we're a bit behind on the rent. My sister-in-law grinned and said, I'll take the upstairs south room. Madison always had a knack for choosing the good spots, didn't she? They saw my mother's death as an opportunity to shamelessly move themselves into my home. Naturally, I thought, I'll send these people packing to hell. Fine, I'll leave. As soon as I agreed, they nearly jumped for joy and said to Jason, Jason, we can live together again. You really can't manage without us, can you? Jason, perhaps too tired to care, lazily laughed and said, yeah, I'm off to bed, and retreated to his room. With spring in their step, my sister-in-law and mother-in-law told me we'll be moving in on Tuesday in 2 weeks, so make sure you're out by then, and left. Next week, huh? I murmured, carefully placing my mother's memorial plaque, portrait, and ashes on the shelf, and whispered to her picture, watch over me, Mom, as if she was smiling back at me, saying, give them hell. I promptly filled out the divorce papers I prepared earlier and rushed them to the courthouse, then started plotting my revenge. On Monday, I was sitting at a calf terrace with a view of the new house, hat pulled down over my eyes, waiting. There was a for sale sign by the new house's door plate. The autumn sky was clear, and as I was leisurely reading a book, a moving truck pulled up in front of the house and out stepped Jason, my sister-in-law, and mother-in-law. Mother-in-law. I knew that Jason had been helping them move over the weekend. I had demurely asked him, please don't come back until the moving day. If I see you, I might get sentimental. They were perplexed by the for sale sign, but Jason nonchalantly suggested it might be a prank and tried to open the door with his key, which of course didn't fit. I changed the locks. Jason was frantically rattling the keys. Both my sister-in-law and mother-in-law looked on with anxious expressions. Frantically, he fiddled with the key as the movers looked on, ready to start. What's the meaning of this for sale sign? My sister-in-law and mother-in-law demanded, irritation rising in their voices. Jason, still seemingly unfazed, said, I'll just make a call, and that's when my phone vibrated. I ignore it, and as he couldn't get through to me, panic began to set in on his face. The two women looked on anxiously as they and Jason received frosty stares from the movers. Finally, he called someone else, the real estate agency listed on the sign, and there I was, sipping my coffee. Hello, I'm calling about a property in... Yes. It's being sold without my consent. Could you come over here, please? Jason began to explain on the phone when he was interrupted, It's already being sold by the owner. No, that can't be right. You want to sell it if I want to buy it? What are you talking about? Please hold on, and he hung up the phone. Then, my sister-in-law and mother-in-law, with faces like furious demons, stormed up to Jason and demanded, hold on a minute. Isn't this the house you bought? Oh. I mean, it's not that I bought it, but isn't it considered joint property if you're married? Surprised, my sister-in-law and mother-in-law turned to me and nearly snapped, what have you done with this house? I responded with a sly voice, what have I done? I sold it. It's my property after all. Feel free to buy it if you want. I thought living here, but kind of arrangement, playing dumb. Jason turned pale and started, hey, you can't just do whatever you want, to which I shot back. What are you talking about? You haven't contributed a dime. And to talk about joint property when you haven't even contributed to living expenses since we got married. How dare you? I think for the first time in my life, I was yelling at someone out of anger. Jason was taken aback by the sudden resistance from a woman who used to be compliant to him. I continued to press Jason, you better give me back all the money I've given you. I'm ready with a lawyer, and shoved a document in his face. I shoved a business card and a claim for alimony in his face. I've always kept a household account book, so I carefully calculated all the money I had given to Jason. Although our marriage only lasted a year and a half, I've given him nearly $20,000. When Jason stumbled, saying, that was supposed to be for our living expenses, right? So my sister-in-law and mother-in-law chimed in, exactly. You can't just claim that. I shouted back, shut up. Don't meddle in someone else's business. And you two have some nerve. It felt like something inside me had exploded. Both my sister-in-law and mother-in-law seemed overwhelmed by my outburst and began to tremble, holding each other. There was no way I was going to lose to these women who were always bad-mouthing others behind their backs. Jason started to back away, looking like he might run off at any moment. He was the type of man who would run when things got tough. use in running, I said firmly. I'm gonna make sure you settle this properly. My resolve seemed to have an impact, as Jason also collapsed, just like my sister-in-law and mother-in-law, looking completely lost. The movers, looking troubled, said, where should we move the items to? Ask them. Picturing where to move to when they don't even have a house, I just smiled sweetly. What happened to them after they lost their place to go? I don't know. They probably rented a new apartment through some contacts of Jason. Jason had quit his job at a company soon after marrying me. Every night, he used the money from me like water, and while it seemed to go well at first, by the time I built our new house, he was barely scraping by. My sister-in-law and mother-in-law, unaware of such things, had come to depend on Jason's supposed financial strength based on the new house he had built and moved into after my mother passed away. They used to say, the beauty salon business is going well lately. We can support you, so you don't have to worry about anything. Swamped with debt and lacking real skill as hairdressers, they couldn't hold down jobs at any salon they went to. They had both been planning to rely on each other and ended up failing. Eventually, Jason got into trouble with some shady characters and disappeared. It was a fitting end for such a deadbeat man. My sister-in-law and mother-in-law are also missing, and I can't help but think they haven't exactly had the best lives. I couldn't get alimony from Jason, but I have come to terms with that. But I've come to see it as the cost of a life lesson. After the divorce, people have said I seem different, and somehow I've entered what you'd call my prime time for attracting others. It seems I used to be seen as serious and quiet, but now there's a certain settled confidence about me that has become attractive. I had been quite put off by the idea of marriage for a while, but as I started dining out with men more often, whenever the mood seemed to be right for something more, I'd excuse myself to go home because of my cats. Their reaction in such moments is quite telling of their character, so it's been a good strategy for sizing up men. In reality, I live in a pet-friendly apartment with my 2 cats. Visit the other day, as I was sorting through my mother's belongings, I found a letter addressed to me. It was dated the month before she passed, right around when I had settled into my new place. The letter was filled with various memories from my childhood through to my professional life, and it ended with her usual phrase, to live in such a nice home, to lead such a good life. I've been blessed with a wonderful daughter. Thank you so much. I hugged that letter from my mother tightly and cried my eyes out for a while. Buying that new place definitely wasn't a waste, I've come to realize. From here on out, I'm committed to living positively and earnestly, keeping my mother's words close to my heart and hoping to make someone feel as rewarded by me as I felt by her. I'm telling you to leave. You woman who can only give birth to girls. The one glaring at me with utter contempt was my husband, Jake. I instinctively rubbed my belly. I had borne 3 daughters through this belly in pain for Jake. But what Jake really wanted was a son. I still remember how after giving birth to our eldest, and then our second daughter, he said, next time it will be a boy. When our 3rd daughter was born, Jake even left the naming all up to me. Is this finally heading to divorce? I felt like sighing. Just with a faint smile, my husband assured me not to worry about a successor. There's already someone else who can bear him a son. I'm Susan, a full-time homemaker, and I just turned 40. I live with my husband, Jake, and our 3 daughters. It's been 3 years since I gave birth to our 3rd daughter. This month, I've decided to quit being a homemaker to go to work. It's because on Jake's salary alone, we couldn't afford to provide lessons for our 2 older daughters. I decided to work for the sake of our 3 children. Fortunately, I found a job quickly, and now I'm managing to cover our household expenses while working. Lately, Jake's been griping more and more about how his folks are getting on in years, and that I should be the one to take care of them. It would be a big help if you could quit your job to look after my parents, Susan. That's out of the question right now. Why? We can live comfortably enough on just my salary if we don't splurge. Splurge? I've never done that. I'm working because your paycheck alone won't cover extracurriculars for the kids. They don't need any extracurriculars. It's perfectly fine if they don't learn anything extra. This is the kind of nagging I always get from Jake. That's why I've learned to just brush it off whenever he brings it up. Are you even listening, Susan? I hear you. I'll do what I can to help out. Honestly, I can't stand my in-laws. I genuinely don't want to help with their care. But Jake and I live near his parents' place. It was his idea to start our married life in an apartment close to them. At the time, I didn't know their true colors and thought it would be convenient for me too, saying naively that it would be helpful. But it didn't take long to see their true nature. That's when I started helping out at their house. I found myself constantly bossed around by my in-laws, being told where to put things, to tidy up, to serve tea like some kind of servant. Being newly married, I couldn't handle it well and just kept helping as they told me to. Because of that, each time I visited their house, they treated me worse and worse. Every visit, I was like a little maid, having to listen to the in-laws boast about the old days or complain about their struggles for what felt like hours. And then they'd end up meddling in our private life, pressing us to quickly produce a male heir. It's even my husband, who said he wanted kids, would say things like, "Of course, I'd prefer a boy." Actually, if it's not a boy, there's no point in having one. When I was pregnant, all that those three cared about was the baby's gender. When they found out our first child was a girl, they insulted me and said things like, "Well, there's a saying. First a girl, then a boy. She'll be handy to have around." When the second and third turned out to be girls too, the in-laws openly lost interest in them. They'd just keep saying, "Next time, make sure it's a boy." So, why is this house such a mess? Or make sure it's a boy. Why is this house such a mess? There's no rowdy boys running around, and still you use being busy as an excuse. Can't you even clean properly? Maybe it's your laziness, that's why you can't have a boy. All these girls, and all they'll do is get married off elsewhere. They can't be successors. You should be taking care of us, the heads of the family, instead of wasting time on girls who are no use as heirs. To think these are their own grandkids they're talking about. I never invited them in the first place, and I sure as heck don't want to go to their place. To go to their place. Being dragged to their house and treated like this is more than I can stand. I've told Jake countless times that I want to keep our distance from his parents, but it's like talking to a wall. That the house being a mess is a fact. Girls are supposed to play quietly and read books, right? Instead, they just scatter their stuff everywhere. If you can't manage housework and childcare, which are supposed to be a woman's job, then it's no wonder you're being criticized. How can you say that when we're both working to raise our 2 kids? It's impossible for housework and childcare to be only my responsibility. If working is your excuse, then just quit and be a stay-at-home mom. If you can't do that, then what my mother is saying is right. Do you think you can support me and our 3 daughters on your salary alone? That's why I'm working too. Sure, there was a time when men worked and women took care of the home and kids, but those days are long gone. Now it's normal for wives to work too. But to accept the changing times while still insisting that housework and childcare are solely a wife's responsibilities is just too convenient. No matter how much I try to convince him, Jake just won't change. Mom is right. It must be as Dad says. Every time I hear these words, thoughts of divorce cross my mind. But my daughters, oblivious to everything, are fond of Jake. Only the eldest, a middle schooler, seems to have some reservations about Jake. Being in the throes of adolescence, she doesn't seem to be very interactive with Jake. Yet, whenever I see the third girl innocently laughing and clamoring to be held by Jake, calling him daddy, daddy, I can't bring myself to go through with a divorce. 3 months have passed since then. For some reason, Jake started coming home late more frequently. I was suspicious and asked him when he returned home. "Jake, you've been quite late recently. Is something up at work?" "No, it just happened today. A junior messed up, and I had to cover some overtime. Don't worry about it." At first I believed his words, but he began to come home late more often, and I asked again. Then Jake started making excuses, like he was held up at work entertaining clients, or meetings with partners ran long. Even as I started to suspect Jake's words and actions, I couldn't muster the courage to take that step away because I didn't want to deprive my children of their beloved father. I started to pretend not to care about Jake's late returns. Half a year's gone by in this way. A colleague I work with mentioned seeing Jake walking in the downtown area with a young woman. Our families are close, often going camping or having barbecues together on holidays, and my daughters are around the same age as hers. Jake and she always got along well whenever they met, so I knew she couldn't have mistaken someone else for Jake. I told her I'd talk to Jake about it, hoping it was just a misunderstanding. When I met the investigator after work, I was presented with substantial evidence. There were several photos of Jake entering a hotel with another woman, and the results were incriminating. I decided to confront Jake about the affair as soon as I got home. Though he had gotten home before me, he was just looking at his phone in the living room. And while he felt sorry, I couldn't keep it to myself. "Jake, can you explain this to me?" Jake didn't respond to my words and just started making a phone call with a cold expression. For some reason, Jake remained silent, determined not to speak. So your silence means you admit it's true? It's none of your business. You really think a husband's affair is none of his wife's business? It's none of your business? No matter how many times I asked, Jake only repeated that it was none of my business. Then, suddenly, the doorbell rang. While I was thinking of pretending we weren't home, Jake quickly went to open the door. What's going on? Did you call them here? I hadn't planned on telling the truth until everyone arrived. Well, now that everyone's here, explain these photos. I challenged Jake again with the photos. The woman in the photos is pregnant with a boy. Our family has always needed a son to carry on the family line. I told you before we got married that we needed a son, but you kept having girls. So you're no longer needed and should leave right away. Just when I thought Jake was starting to make sense, he handed me divorce papers with an explanation that didn't make any sense. Hold on, pregnant. How many affairs do you need to have for that to happen? Sure, I knew about the son issue, but we can't choose the gender of our babies. Besides, you always seem to love our daughters. Susan, you've heard the story, but you're someone who could only have girls. Just leave this house quietly? I'm sorry, but I'm not talking to you. I'm talking to my husband, Jake. What's going on? As I pressed Jake for answers, my in-laws interjected. That's enough. We're finally having the boy we always wanted. It's best for you, who couldn't do anything, to leave. I'm not talking to you. I'm talking you, Jake. So why did both of you come barging in? Don't try to change the subject. At my words, my husband lets out a heavy sigh. Enough already. There's no need to discuss this. All Susan has to do is leave this house quietly. What are you saying? We have 3 daughters. And you know as well as I do that it's impossible for me to support all 3 with my current income. Right, Jake? That's none of my business. You're the one who wanted to have 3 girls. Just get out already. Racheless, don't be ridiculous. What do you mean wanted? You used to dote on all 3 of them too, didn't you, Jake? Why would you say something like this all of a sudden? I thought my husband would say something in response to my words, but it was his mistress who retorted. Oh, this is why dealing with an older woman is such a hassle. When you're told to leave, you should just leave gracefully. What are you even doing here? It's because of you showing up that our family is in this mess. Instinct, don't you mean it's your fault for not being able to have a boy? The mistress sneers at me with a snort. I painfully realize that I've expected too much from my husband. We have 3 kids, and our youngest adores her dad, so I wanted to believe that divorce isn't the only right answer. I thought he would think of the children when faced with the evidence. Even if he didn't have a change of heart and we couldn't be a happy family, I believed he would at least act the part of a good father in front of the kids. But in reality, he shamelessly brings home not just his parents, but even his mistress. I understand. I'll file for divorce. I was too naive. That's what I realize as I stand up to pack my things. I had thoughts about the mistress smirking as she watched, but I didn't care anymore. I snatched the divorce papers from my husband and signed them. I write my name as the guardian for our daughters. I'm taking custody of all 3 girls. I'll be filing for alimony and child support later. I'm leaving now, but I'll come back for the things I can't take with me today. Do whatever you want. My in-laws, who usually make snide remarks, listen to our conversation with dissatisfied expressions. It seems they've left this discussion up to my husband. Feeling the tense atmosphere, I hug my eldest daughter, who has been cautiously observing from the room. Maybe she understood just from that, because she immediately started packing her things. The middle and youngest daughters, thinking they were going on an outing, cheerfully prepared their to-go bags. Even as we gathered our bare essentials and headed for the front door, no one came out from the living room. The middle and youngest daughters looked puzzled, but when they waved goodbye cheerfully, they left the house in high spirits. I called my parents' house. I hadn't been home much since I moved far away after getting married. Despite the sudden call, my mother told me to come back as soon as I could. There without telling my daughters about their father's affair. I explained, Daddy and Mommy are just heading down different paths now. The younger 2, who loved idols, recalled a recently disbanded group who had said the same thing. Does that mean we can't be together anymore? It seemed my eldest understood what I was saying. I returned to my parents' home with my daughters, and we were swamped with changing our family registry and various other legal and administrative processes. Before I knew it, 2 months had passed, and I successfully received alimony and child support from my husband and his mistress. I had filed for compensation for the affair against both, and additionally for child support from my husband. But wanting to see their faces ever again, I conducted everything through a lawyer. It cost money, but it was worth it to avoid the stress. The lawyer's visit to my in-laws to discuss alimony and child support was met with their silent bitterness, as if they were swallowing a bitter pill. Nevertheless, my husband had an affair and even got another woman pregnant, which looked bad to outsiders. To prevent more complications, both my husband and my in-laws hastily gathered the funds for payment. It seemed they even covered the mistress's portion of the alimony. Another 3 months went by. While we couldn't afford luxuries, my parents supported us, and the 6 of us were able to start living a peaceful life together. I was just beginning to get used to life without my husband, as were our daughters. But on his day off, my husband suddenly called me. When I ignored him, the phone kept ringing over and over. I thought it would be trouble if it kept ringing until our daughters returned from their lessons, so I reluctantly decided to answer my husband's call. Good, you finally picked up. What do you want all of a sudden? Well, you see, the woman I cheated with just gave birth. What am I supposed to say to that? I was about to hang up coldly when my husband suddenly raised his voice. The legs? The crotch. According to my husband, the child that his mistress had given birth to was a girl. Moreover, it wasn't a case of a mix-up during the ultrasound. The doctors had been saying it was a girl from the start. The mistress had lied about the baby's sex because she wanted to marry my husband, who apparently would have considered divorce if it weren't a boy, but his parents put a stop to that. They were worried about not having any grandchildren if things continued as they were, so my husband called off the divorce. He was supposed to be thinking about having another child right away, but his life was in shambles and he couldn't focus on that. Right after the birth, she couldn't work and had no income. She refused to do housework perfectly because of child rearing, and she flatly denied doing any caregiving for my in-laws. Of course, if you're living with a baby who may or may not have a steady head yet, it's gonna be like that. Yet, living with this new wife, my husband now told me he was thinking of divorce again. So, what do you want me to do about it? I responded coldly, and my husband said, Susan, please, can't we start over? Huh? As if I have any intention of getting back together with you now. I lashed out at him. Don't talk like that. Despite having thorns like a rose, you're delicate and bloom beautifully, aren't you? I love that about you, Susan. Let's give it another try. My husband was trying to hold me back with his poetic words. Those words gave me chills. Susan, are you listening? We've been together for a long time. Your feelings haven't changed just because we've been apart for a bit, have they? Perhaps I would have been moved by my husband's words of love if this were back when we were married, but after discovering his affair and getting a divorce, all I could feel was coldness. I just gave a bitter smile. You're smiling, so that means you forgive me, right? My husband happily misunderstood. Hey, you're totally clueless. That was a bitter smile. I'm not laughing, and I haven't forgiven you. Why do you have to say that? Susan, please consider getting back together. Haven't we always been doing well? You were happy with me, weren't you? We were not doing well, that's why we fought so many times. I wasn't happy, that's why I divorced you. It was you who said you didn't need me. That's true, right? Then we can start over. It was me who suggested we break up, so I'm suggesting we start over. Let's do it. My husband started spouting nonsense about wanting to reconcile. He even brought up old times, and honestly, I was fed up. But then a thought struck me, and I changed the subject. Oh, Tate, why do you know her name? She didn't introduce herself that time, did she? My husband sounded surprised when I mentioned the name of my remarriage partner. Of course no. I heard it from the detective, and I even sent a certified mail for the alimony claim. And about her. What about Kate? I was just wondering who she might be targeting next. She has a hobby of breaking up seemingly happy couples or married people, and since you and I are divorced, I was wondering who the next target is. My husband said nothing. Perhaps he was speechless, mouth agape. I proceeded to explain to my unresponsive husband what I knew about this woman named Kate. Kate had always been adorable since she was a child, always surrounded by various people. Her father, the company president, doted on her and she was spoiled, always getting what she wanted. It's precisely because she could get anything she wanted that taking things from others became her hobby. As an adult, her targets became other people's boyfriends, fiancés, and husbands. Since taking things was her hobby, she would easily discard them once she managed to start a relationship. When I introduced her dating history, investigated by a detective, to Jake, he gasped in a strangled voice. What the heck? Why bring this up now? Back then, all you said was get out. You never listened to my side of the story. So I did as I was told and left. It's not like a woman who approaches a married man can be considered good-hearted. Don't talk like that, Susan. It's so sneaky of you, making it sound like it's my fault. If you'd just explained things properly back then, it would have been different. Jake, for some reason, started to speak in a defeated tone, playing the victim when he spoke to me. Angered by his words, I snapped at him. What are you on about? You're the one in the wrong, not like you are wrong. Why don't you just live however you want? I don't care anymore. At my words, Jake suddenly spoke in a softer tone. Susan, it's going to be tough raising 3 daughters all by yourself. Let me take at least one of them. If you let me take one, you'll have an easier time. For 2 kids enough. The cloying sweetness in his voice was so vile, it made my head spin. What in the world does he think of our daughters? I could never send them to live with such a man. Neither Jake nor his parents really want the girls because they love them. He kept saying any girl would do, or just one, talking about them as if they weren't people. I could only see a future where they would be preyed upon by Jake and his parents. I knew that as they grew up, they would receive the same terrible treatment I did. That's why I refused adamantly. Don't be ridiculous. I will raise my daughters properly. Don't be like that. A child needs her father, don't you think? A father who can't even raise his kids properly, let alone cheats, has no right to custody. I spoke firmly to leave no room for misunderstanding. Even so, it's up to the girls to decide if they want a father like that. They're too young to decide for themselves now, so I'll take responsibility and raise them. And enraged, I conveyed my feelings and hung up the phone on Jake. I don't know if it was because I immediately blocked his number, but I never heard from him again. Months went by. It seems Jake and Kate's divorce went through without a hitch. Kate went back home with her newborn child. Apparently, the child's father is also married, and she's being sued for alimony not just by Jake but also by his actual wife. Strapped for cash, she seems to be working hard at raising her child with the support of her parents back home. Terrifyingly, she shows no signs of remorse. She is aware that what she's doing is wrong, and if caught, she pays alimony as a sign of her sincerity. However, it seems that the money is also being provided by her father, who's a company president, allowing her to live a carefree life. It appears that the reason Kate went after my husband was just a whim. But with her natural beauty and status, she would freely take other women's boyfriends and married men, and she decided to target married men as her next conquest. It just so happened that Kate set her sights on Jake and me when she saw us in town. It was a complete nuisance to have our lives disrupted by her caprice. And the reason Kate decided to marry Jake, something she usually didn't bother with after taking a man, was because Jake was indecisive and indulgent towards her. It seems Kate wanted a man who treated her like a princess, indulging her every whim and buying her whatever she desired. Now, I couldn't care less about it all. I was stunned by the sheer audacity of not just my easily swayed husband, but also Kate, the woman he cheated with. My husband Jake was deceived by his affair partner, but he had the chance to refuse and didn't take the bait. No matter what stories I hear, the fact that Jake betrayed me won't just disappear. I also heard that Jake's family was ostracized by friends and relatives and had moved far away. They only stormed into my house once after the move. Susan, stop being stubborn and hand over one of the kids. That's right, Susan. We'll raise her together. The 3 of us. Please stop. I'm fine raising her on my own. On my own, I thought my youngest daughter, who is still too young to understand, would be okay. However, the 3 of them came with a menacing look to take her away, and I resisted desperately. You can handle it, Susan. You can raise her while working, they said. Hand her over, Susan. Poor thing. Don't worry, we'll raise her properly. No matter what I said, they wouldn't listen. Stop. Don't take her. Is this kidnapping? My youngest daughter cried loudly, and I screamed just as loudly. Thanks to our cries, the nearby residents gathered and quickly restrained the 3 of them. After a while, the police arrived from a call and took the 3 away. Petitedly thanked my neighbors, relieved that my daughter was safe. Later, the 3 of them received a restraining order. Since they know where we live, it wouldn't be strange for them to show up at any time. I have discussed moving with my parents, who live with us, because I feel sorry for them too. They said they would dispose of the house and move with us, as it would be a nuisance to be followed forever. Still, I feel guilty for changing my daughter's environment so often. Yet, seeing their smiling faces and healthy growth heals me. Gina Ortiz, I've decided to move to a new place to protect them. Just before moving, I received a call from an unregistered number. Thinking it was the moving company or someone from the city office, I answered, only to find out it was surprisingly Kate. Summing up her sobbing story, she had apparently gotten into trouble for being with too many men and had contracted a serious disease. I need money for treatment, so give me back the alimony, she cried. But there's nothing I need to do for you. Her audacity was too much, and without much of a response, I just hung up. I immediately blocked her and bought a new cell phone, so now she can't reach me anymore. I am grateful to my parents for coming with me, and I am determined to keep working hard for my daughter's healthy upbringing.